Salutations and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kadology and I make videos about everything and anything to do with modern society. So today I'm a bit under the weather, mainly because I got a booster jab a couple of days ago and I have been rather violently ill ever since. And only today do I actually feel a semblance of normality gradually coming over me, and so I thought I would exploit this fortuitous situation and record something. But alas, I still feel rather brittle, frail, and as if I have well cemented myself into my dotage. But instead of wallowing in self-pity and a loss of appetite, I thought I would peruse the comment section of a video which I made a few days ago. And this video was a bit off the beaten track to the usual content which I align myself to. But I nonetheless thought that it was interesting and that it did inevitably relate to modern society. The good thing about just saying that everything that I do is about modern society is that I can pretty much do anything that I want, which is great. There was one comment in this particular video which tickled me a bit and got me thinking about a broader question which I would like this video to be about. And the comment was as follows: the Britishness of this channel is just, I can't, just can't. Laugh out loud. And somebody responded in the way that I would probably respond to a comment like this, more so amused than in any way wounded, because I was very, very amused by this comment. I cannot lie. Hi, I'm curious what it is that is so British about it. I'm not offended, just wondering, is it the accent, editing style, the approach to or choice of topics? And our dear commentator responds: the approach, the need to be fair and balanced, and make every argument two-sided. Sometimes it isn't necessary. And so again, I was amused, in no way offended at all. If you know me, I have basically a non-existent self-esteem, so nothing offends me. I am basically just a rock. Based on my analytics and the general statistics surrounding YouTube, I figured that it is most likely that this comment was made by somebody who is, well, not British, but specifically American. And even if it isn't, I thought that it very much represented some of the cultural differences between America and England. Mainly because I think just in the popular mindset, there is not really a distinction between the two, because we seem to just bracket all Western countries underneath that heading, Western countries, or under that heading of modern societies, first world countries. And typically, I think just because of the history, there is just this notion that Americans and Britons are one and the same, just with different accents and more of an affiliation to tea on the one hand and a better natural tan on the other. So I thought that I would compose my own little list of things that I have noticed since being on YouTube, which is predominantly American dominated, and also just in general, my channel is watched by 90+% an American audience as far as I can tell. So before I get into this, please just remember that this is not intended to offend anybody insofar as I will be offending everybody. So I am in no way saying that Britons are better or Americans are better. I am merely reflecting on what I have personally in my own personal experience seen and witnessed and been exposed to, particularly since being on YouTube, which is an incredible environment in order to see a lot of cultural differences and intrigues. So with that in mind, sit back, relax, and enjoy this self-deprecating analyses into the cultural mind bogglement that I find whenever I'm exposed to comments like this. I will say that one thing that I have definitely noticed, especially being on YouTube, is that Britons speak a lot slower than Americans. And I get this all the time in my comment section about how slowly I speak, which is ironic because I actually think that I speak quite fast relative to other people whom I speak to. And I do realize when I compare how I speak to the YouTubers whom I watch, who are predominantly American, they do speak a lot faster than I do. And somehow I can understand it, but it did take a lot of time because I had to very much just attune myself to what they were saying. And I definitely do see that this is a major thing. Britons speak very slowly and we articulate ourselves quite extensively. At least, I mean, it depends on where you live in England, but I'm speaking more about the south of England. But I think even up north, even though the accent is so different to mine, because in no way am I a representation of what a British person is, definitely not. But I am, I would say, a representation insofar as we do take time with our words and what we are saying, even those of us who do not sound terribly posh in saying it. One thing that I have noticed is that Americans, at least on social media, are very ready to publicly expose someone or publicly expose a business or something like that. Whereas in Britain, that most definitely is a no-no. You resolve everything behind closed doors and it remains that way. The public does not need to know about things. And this is something that I experienced very, very recently. You may have noticed if you are watching this from the UK that my video about being bullied at my former place of employment has been taken down in the UK. Yes, oh yes. Yes, and this proved very irksome to me, and I did try to state my case and to defend myself because apparently merely expressing my opinion, my personal opinion about working at an unnamed place of employment is defamatory. I actually kind of like this, and my opinion on this has changed very much so, because previously I definitely was very English about this idea that you must keep everything to yourself. Personal things that are going wrong does not leave the house. Everything remains in the family and just in your mind. But now I think, you know what? Why? Just why? I used to have a problem with people oversharing online, but I think so much of life is now going online that this makes sense. And you know what? It's not really doing substantial harm to anyone. I'm not saying therefore it's doing people good. I'm quite ambivalent about it, but I do think that there is definitely a need to actually give people a voice, and social media is a place where very advantageously people are able to speak about things which otherwise they wouldn't be able to. The fact that with my video about my former boss being so inappropriate and so discriminatory toward me could be viewed by a few thousand people all over the world, and based on the incredible comments in the comment section, really helped a lot of people and just really was a place where people could share their experiences, their fears, their worries, their journey into actually going and doing what they love was incredible. And that wouldn't happen without social media and without my feeling as if, you know, it's actually okay for me to make a video about this and to actually go to social media with this grievance. But this definitely is not an English thing. Really and truly, it is not. You do things in private. That is something that I've really come to terms with, and something that I really like, if I'm going to get really personal about this, about, I think, American social media culture, that willingness to actually just let it all out, especially when sometimes it is a good cathartic way to actually deal with and process something. I'm not saying that in every situation. I think sometimes, you know, if kids are beating each other up, don't get out your phone. But I mean, I don't think that's an American thing. I've seen people in England do that as well. So, I mean, I think there's a time and a place, but sometimes I think the British don't realize that there are more times and more places in which you can do that, which Americans seem to realize a lot more readily. One thing that I noticed, especially in my last video, which I uploaded, and based on the specific analytics for that video, I know that the majority of the audience who watched it were American, like the vast majority, is that I find that at least on YouTube, American audiences are a lot more willing to talk on behalf of other social groups and on behalf of other people relative to Britons. Let me explain. In short, I feel that a lot of American YouTubers who I watch and when I read their comment sections have audiences and themselves talk about an injustice which doesn't immediately impact them. And I think I noticed this, especially being somebody who instinctively from looking at me is deemed sort of on the highest level of the victim of society, I think. And I find it fascinating how readily people who do not know me and who do not know about my life or experiences or how I perceive and see things speak about me and speak on behalf of me. I think sometimes this need to speak on behalf of others is often seen as more important than the others, if that makes sense. And an example of this was in my last video that I did. My last video was just basically in general about online stalking or cyber stalking. And I personally was interested in this as somebody who in real life was stalked and was a victim of very severe criminal stalking. And, you know, we've moved on from that. Life goes on. I'm safe now. I'm in a new location. In this video, I was being very neutral, very balanced about things. And a consequence of this was that a lot of the audience watching it perceived me as therefore being in support of stalking antics or being somebody who was quite ambivalent toward such claims being made, right? This interested me because firstly, I did the very British thing of not being personal about it and not expressing that I had a personal interest and empathy with the person making these accusations. And I do now regret that because I think the response to the video would have been very different if I had actually added in my personal touch and story. However, it's not something that I do want to at all talk about, and it's my channel so I don't have to, but there is that sort of expectation I find from a largely American audience of that sort of personal touch to things. And so obviously a lot of the audience was saying this about me in the comment sections, and there was one comment that really got to me because it really emphasized this point of this need to speak on behalf of other people, because apparently this person and other people were speaking on behalf of victims of stalking, not realizing, which was no fault of theirs, that I am a victim of stalking, of very severe in-life physical stalking and its terrible consequences. This mission of justice for poor voiceless victims that an actual person whom you allege to be talking about was waving and saying hello, and you just pew. And I do find this to be a very American thing, more so than a British thing. I think in Britain, a consequence of this and like a not so good aspect of this is that often we overlook things that ought not to be overlooked, such as institutional racism. In Britain, institutional racism is not really deemed to be a thing. People don't really believe in it, and we are in no way and have never really had open, overt, angry, heated conversations about critical race theory taking over our schools and our universities. It isn't as great a deal as it is definitely so in the United States. And I think this can also be seen in the fact that a few months ago, or even just a month ago, I think Jordan Peterson came to speak at the Cambridge Union and he was welcomed with open arms. There wasn't any animosity toward him. There wasn't any protest about him speaking or voicing his opinion or talking to fans. He was sort of heralded as a hero in a sense. And this does tend to be something that's quite British, quite a willingness to accept the other side and to let the other side talk and have an opinion about things. And that's where this comment gets to, I believe. This comment about being fair and balanced and making every argument two-sided. Sometimes it's not necessary. That's definitely somewhere where I think we differ, because I think it is always necessary. This is another point. I think, very broadly speaking, Americans believe that there is right and there is wrong. Britons don't. And I think that this is a historical thing more than it is just a cultural thing. This has more to do with the Second World War, very, very broadly and crudely speaking. I think because the war was just so very close to home here, that there is this notion, at least I think in Europe where individuals were most affected by it, that God is dead. And I think we felt the death of God, metaphorically and figuratively speaking, more directly than America did. And I think it's just has a lot to do with also the American dream and manifest destiny and American history, fight for independence, being a global superpower, that sort of thing, and the dominance of American soft power and culture globally. And that very much feeds into a sense of pride and a sense of nationalism, and even a very passive sort of nationalism, in the sense that I think with a lot of young Americans, it's not so much that they're patriotic about their country, in as much as it's sort of just assumed that the rest of the world is like America in a way, at least insofar as looking at YouTube and how and what people speak about and are willing to speak about and that sort of thing. It definitely does feel like there is this notion that the rest of the world is sort of doing the same thing, and that's fine. I think we all inevitably think that, but I think because of America's outreach, there are greater implications of that than there otherwise would be. So that is what it is. In Britain, I feel that because the church is not as great an immediate influence and religion isn't as big an influence, that we are definitely not exposed to moral questions in the same way. And we are definitely not on the quest to find what is right relative to what is wrong. This can be seen, I think, just in the abortion conversation. I, since living here, have never encountered anybody protesting about abortion, ever. Not even when I was at university. It doesn't even factor terribly into at least the immediate culture and the immediate conversations about social care and welfare and women's rights and bodies as it does appear to be in the United States. We are religious in the sense of being of the Christian faith, but not so much that it is deemed an aspect of our identity, if that makes sense. We are definitely impacted by continental philosophy, where everything is very melodramatically about how one sort of has an awakening from the realization that God is dead and now there's no meaning in life and everything is pointless and it's just sort of a Kafkaesque existence and you need to find meaning, and how are you going to find it? And oh yes, you find it through realizing that morality is just a huge hoax and you can make your own morality and find yourself on your own individuality. That is also another thing. Britons are incredibly individualistic, and this is going to be a controversial one, because I know that there is just this stereotype generally that, I mean, this entire video is just stereotypes, but hey ho, there is a stereotype that American culture is individualistic and it's all about the self and being selfish. I disagree. I will fight in disagreement of this, because I definitely, in comparison, I see Americans as very, very family orientated. very family orientated, even when you would think, why do you even try? Or why do you even bother? Even when it clearly does not work at all and should not work. And you just shouldn't even try. You shouldn't bother. You shouldn't even be living in the same state as each other, let alone the same continent, let alone the same planet. They will still come together and eat together. I am seeing, at least on the comment sections of like the kinds of videos that I sometimes watch, that American audiences, especially younger generations, I think mainly because of identity politics being such a big thing just culturally generally now, that younger generations are more willing to put up boundaries between themselves and their families. But I think that this has definitely been a feature of Britain and of England, and I would say a lot of Western Europe for quite a while now. There isn't that sort of loyalty to family in the same way. It's interesting because socially, I would say that America is very individualistic. And I say that purely because there isn't universal healthcare or a very strong welfare and nanny state. In the familial and family unit and in one's personal life, Americans are very selfless. And I think the opposite is the case with Britain. In our individual lives, we are very, very selfish and very individualistic. But socially, we are very selfless in that we have universal credit, a welfare state, national health service. You will, at least theoretically, be protected by the state, and the state is there as your friend. Whereas in the US, that is not the case. The state is not your friend. Like, you can have a gun against the state. We wouldn't dream of such a thing. Golly, that is something that I do find quite interesting, especially because of this general notion that I find a lot of Britons tend to talk about how selfish Americans are, and, you know, they only care about themselves, and like they've just like polluted the world with individualism. And I think, no. Nay, I say. Americans are a lot nicer than Britons. I hold by this entirely and completely. And it's so strange because online, I have not yet seen a Karen compilation. I hate saying that because I love the name Karen or Karens or Karens. I love that name. It's a beautiful name. It's just been so destroyed by this cultural reference. But let's just say middle-aged individuals, predominantly women who are Caucasian, who get very angry at very little insignificant things in public. I never see any that feature Britons. They all seem to be American, predominantly women. But it's so strange because when I worked in retail, all the American customers were so lovely, so lovely. And even at university, all the American students were so kind and just so, I wouldn't say optimistic, but very much willing to make the best out of a bad situation or make the best out of what they had and still thriving towards something. I find it quite endearing, and I find that even though I am definitely the complete antithesis of that, I sort of want to be close to those people. Sort of, I don't know, be like a blackhead on the back of a very enthusiastic American. Just, you know, I'll just be that British blackhead, you know. And just follow you through life. Just feed off your joy. Oh no, that sounds terrible. I wouldn't feed off it. I'd be benign. A benign British blackhead. I think you can just tell when you ask a British person, how are you? Britons don't even say, how are you? We say, hiya, you're right. And I find this very interesting. And this I found very interesting coming from South Africa to England, because I'd never heard that. Because in South Africa, you do the how are you instead. But inevitably, I think, look at me making all of these connections. Because we were colonized by Britain, we have a lot of British mannerisms in South Africa. So in South Africa, at least when I lived there, when you'd say, hello, how are you? I'm well, thank you. How are you? Oh, I'm doing well, thank you. Very good. Then you'd go on your merry way. You'd ask how somebody was, but the expectation was that they would tell you that they were fine and then ask you the same. And the expectation being that you would say the exact same. You'd both say thank you you and go on your merry way. So it was very formal, very clean cut, and you didn't digress from that script. In England, it's exactly the same, but the British will not even give you the opportunity to potentially digress from that script. You cannot even go a little bit off the mark with that. It's too much for them to even wait until you have even responded to that. I find this really interesting because when I walk past somebody and we say hello, hello, or hiya, hiya, they'll say you're right, and they'll keep walking. And it does not matter if I respond or not, because they do not care a hoot. See, we are very selfish, not a hoot. And they say you're right because then you can't say anything else. There isn't even the opportunity to say I'm not well, or I'm sick, or oh well, you know, I feel, because the inference is that you are all right. And it's not even are you all right, it's you're all right, as in you are all right. And they just sort of have that little inflection on the end, a very subtle inflection on the end, to make it sound as if it's a question, as if they actually do care. But we all know that we don't care. We all know that. It took me a while to get used to it, especially when somebody would walk past me and say, hiya, you're right. And I obviously would go, oh yes, I'm well, thank you. And how are you? And that just blew them off. They did not know what was going on. So I have learned. Whereas when I'm in a store, when I'm working in a store or anywhere actually, and I come across somebody who's American or even Australian, but we're not talking about Australia right now, American, and I'll say, how are you? I will get a whole story. And I'm not complaining at all. I love it because it actually feels, oh, wow, they actually listened to my question. They actually want to respond to it in the way that inevitably the words mean that I want them to respond to it. And that's good. So that is great. I think this has more to do with YouTube and social media, but in America, online communities are very sacred. And I think that this relates more so to what I was saying about society not being a big thing in America. And I think that in order to compensate for that, people have moved online and formed communities online in which having a community and that community spirit and ethos is very important and integral. And having an identity with that community is very important. Whereas in England, I have not noticed that as much. And I think in relation to this, in America, there's a huge emphasis on the right and the left. And it means completely different things in the US to what it means here. I think in the US, being on the left or left tube or bread tube has very specific characteristics and means something very definitive, whereas here it doesn't. So here, for instance, if I were to say that somebody's quite left-leaning, that would quite literally mean things that I think in America are deemed to be accepted by everyone, I guess. So here, being quite left-leaning, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're on the left, but it does mean something quite different to sort of the social norms of Britain, because Britain is a very conservative country. And I say conservative with a small c, like we are quite reserved, quiet. Your personal life is very much your personal life. We don't talk about anything. I think here, if you support gay marriage, you're considered left-leaning. If you are a vegan, you're left-leaning. If you're a vegetarian, you're left-leaning. A lot of things here make you left-leaning that I think in North America would not be deemed left-leaning. There's just a lot of things that really distinguish Britain and Americans from one another in ways that I don't think are often sort of seen or spoken about. And I found it quite interesting just to look at. And I found it particularly interesting in my last video that I did, which was specifically about an American YouTuber and something going on in an American context. And sort of the response to that was very amusing to watch and to see unfolding. And I'm not saying that one is right and that one is wrong. This is purely done in good faith, and this is just fun. And, you know, if anything, just blame it on my culture. But yes, I had fun making this. This is quite different. I was not expecting to make this. So thank you so much for watching. And please tell me where in the world you are from and whether you agree or disagree with anything that I have said and what you think as well. I love reading what you had to say. Thank you so much. And I will see you in the next one.